On this episode of Locked On Lightning, the NHL season has finally come to a close. Are the Lightning no longer the big brothers in Florida? As well as we take a look at some of the possibilities that might happen this summer for the Lightning. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs have concluded, the sports don't stop, but we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On this episode, we're taking a look at really just taking a look back on the season. Some of the most exciting playoffs that we have probably seen in quite some time as well. Regardless whether or not the Lightning had a long run or not. We also take a dive into the conversation that is now going to be had for the entirety of the summer, as well as for a long time now. With the Panthers winning their first Stanley Cup, have the tides officially shifted in the Sunshine State when it comes to Big Brother and Little Brother. And we also wrap things up with the possibilities that might occur for the Lightning this summer. Before we dive into any of those topics, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Go ahead, subscribe to our channel there. Comment below. So, unfortunately, last night, Game 7 Stanley Cup Final, as we all know by now, 24 hours later, little under 24 hours later, Florida Panthers were able to survive a reverse sweep in the last deciding game of the Stanley Cup Final, picking up their first Stanley Cup title in 30 years. And it's always bittersweet, regardless of if the Lightning are in the Stanley Cup or not. I think we could all agree that the Stanley Cup Final is always exciting for any hockey fan. And it's just unfortunate that now we got to wait pretty much till October to get more hockey. I mean, I don't really get, if you've been a listener of the show for some time, I don't get excited for preseason. I just don't. I'm sorry. But no, it's been a very interesting season. It's been a season that I think that we'll look back on probably in a couple of years or even a year later and say that this was one of the most interesting and exciting seasons that we've had, really. And maybe I sound biased saying this, but one of the most exciting seasons that we've had really since 2019, 2020. Just because of, I would only say 2020 and then maybe even the year after, not so much because of how the Lightning played and what them ending up winning back-to-back championships in those seasons. No, it's just because of everything that happened throughout the course of that season. Obviously, the big talking point from this season, Connor McDavid and Nikita Kucherov becoming the fourth and fifth players to record 100 assists in a season. Something that when you look at the players in front of them, is just absolutely legendary. For that to happen. You saw a lot of teams take steps forward. I was really impressed, regardless of what you thought about the Panthers coming into this season, from them losing in the Stanley Cup Final last year. I was still very impressed by really how they were able to overcome, I think we could agree, the expectations that were probably put forward by a lot of people in the league, and really thought that, when you see teams that kind of have as good a seasons as the Panthers did last year and unfortunately lose in the final, especially in the way that they did against the Golden Knights, you kind of would have figured that, maybe they would have taken a step back just because just having a little bit of a hangover. But that wasn't so much the case. Other storylines around the NHL, Dallas and Winnipeg out in the Central Division. I don't think a lot of people at the start of the season really thought that the Winnipeg Jets were really going to be in the thick of a playoff race or really in the top three. I thought that Nashville out in that division was, even though they were kind of just a wild card team and a team that I didn't think that was very deep to start the season. I always feel like with UC Saros out there in Nashville, I always felt like as long as you have a goaltender that's solid like he is, you could always go a little bit farther than maybe people would have expected. Vancouver, I think, surprised a lot of people this season as well. The Canucks are just one of those teams that I think that we have, just as hockey fans in general, have grown accustomed to just figuring, well, it doesn't matter who they have on their team and, how they play. It's always going to fall apart at some point. And it kind of did, if we're being completely honest here with, just everything that transpired in the playoffs. They actually, I believe they lost two goaltenders. They had Demko, who was a phenomenal goaltender all year. I mean, he was hurt here and there, but the fact that, when you lose your goaltender, regardless, even trying to get past a wildcard team like Nashville, that's going to be difficult right out of the gates, especially when you have like who we just talked about, UC Saros. Out in the East, it was, I think, really just a kind of, I wouldn't say so much deep, because the Rangers kind of, I would say the Rangers were kind of like in control all year for the most part. But the thing that really kind of was interesting about the East was kind of, we knew Florida, regardless of the hangover stuff, post-cup hangovers, you knew they were still going to be in it, and just with the way the Atlantic Division is structured, you kind of would have figured really the wild card in all of this coming into this season would have been either Detroit or Buffalo. As it turned out, neither of those teams really were able to keep in the rate or really make any effect. Maybe like Detroit to a certain degree, but as the weeks went on, they were just a team that really, quite frankly, couldn't consistently play well down the stretch. And we saw that, and that was ultimately the reason as to why they weren't able to make the playoffs. And ultimately was the reason why kind of Washington really sort of fell into a wild card spot in the East, which kind of sucked, especially if you're a Detroit Red Wings fan. And the same goes for the Islanders. I mean, it was just a very strange divisional and West wild card race out there, especially with the Metropolitan division. I still don't understand how the Islanders were able to finish the season at 94 points, having a team that really, when you look at them on paper, I mean, we always talk about it here on the podcast, how teams on paper usually tend to look stronger than they actually do sometimes, depending on the team, than they do on ice. That kind of seemed like it was just the battle of the mediocres after Tampa Bay and the wild card, really. Pittsburgh kind of bailed everybody out there as well, with them kind of having a not so good season and missing the playoffs. But really, maybe down the road in this summer, we'll do a little bit more of a look back on the NHL season. It was just a season that really, a lot of players really just, there were so many storylines, as there normally is. Reinhart with the Panthers just playing the best hockey of his career. Really a lot of players on that Panthers team, as well as Edmonton on the other side of that. Connor McDavid, just when you thought that he couldn't get any better, he goes and breaks one of Gretzky's playoff records, which is insane when you say it out loud. But yeah, I think at some point we'll drop an episode during the summer when we kind of look back on the NHL season. We'll probably have a guest help me out with that show, because those are probably, that would make for a great conversation. Probably maybe Armando from Locked On Florida Panthers. We can get him on and talk about that, or even Chris and Kyle from Locked On Avalanche. So stay tuned for that episode. As you know, summer here on Locked On Lightning, we always tend to have a lot of guests just to fill the time. But at the same time, we'll also be having our 2004 review where we do a rewatch of all the games from the 2004 Stanley Cup run for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So keep an eye out for that, which starts on Thursday. We'll be talking about game 1 in round 1 for the Lightning as they take one step towards a very long walk or run, whatever you want to call it, towards their first Stanley Cup championship. So keep an eye out for that. So in just a little bit, we're going to talk about, kind of the blowback, I guess, if you want to call it that. Now that the Panthers have won their first Stanley Cup championship and also have made 2 straight Stanley Cup finals, is the tide beginning to shift in Florida? Are the Lightning no longer viewed as the big brothers? We'll talk about that. I mean, I think this conversation as well in the comments will go a lot of ways. So I can't wait to see what all of you have to say about it. But first, before we get into that topic, I want to talk about today's sponsor, and that is our friend over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, listen, I love sports. I think that much has been established on this show. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have officially wound down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime when I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So as always, I want to thank you all one last time for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to our podcast. Go ahead and follow us on our social media pages, LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. You can follow more of my work over at boltsbythebay.com. I'll be posting all the articles that I write throughout on that website. On my Twitter page at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. So now that the NHL season is over and the Panthers have captured their first Stanley Cup championship, which, let me start off by saying, I'm happy. I'm happy for them. You always want, and I don't think there's really many Lightning fans, from what I could see on social media, that are upset about this. I mean, it's one of those things where really you can't be upset about it. I mean, if you're salty over losing in the first round to the Panthers, my response to that would be, I mean, as optimistic as we want it to be going into that series this year, I mean, let's face it, really in hindsight, and really if we were being brutally honest with ourselves and not biased at all, the Lightning really had a very, very small chance of winning that series, considering how they played the season, how they finished up the season after they clinched the playoff spot. I mean, it was just, you sleptwalk going into a fight with by far the best team in the league. I don't care who won the President's Trophy. I don't care. And the Panthers didn't care either. The Panthers were really basically the best team all season long. And they proved it. And they proved, really nobody cares, as we all know, as the Lightning found out in 2019. It doesn't matter what you do during the regular season. The only thing that matters at the end of the day is what you do in the playoffs and how you finish your playoffs. So now the question remains, now that they have their championship, I mean, are we starting to see a shift? Have we already had a shift in the in-state rivalry, big brother, little brother conversation. I think we already had. I think that solid structure of saying that the Lightning were the big brothers, if it wasn't completely torn down last year, it was definitely cracked. And then I think that in the way that the Lightning lost to Florida, not so much by the Lightning's inability to keep up with Florida, more so just displayed by Florida's by their performance and their level of talent. I think that they're on even ground, and I think that yes, it might be recency bias to say that, but I mean, given what could potentially happen with both clubs this summer, which we'll get into in just a little bit, but I think that definitely, I don't know, I can't say for certain if these two teams are on opposite ends of the power seesaw. I think that maybe, if anything, and this might sound outlandish, especially to Cats fans, and if you're listening to this, which, why are you? Go ahead and celebrate your Stanley Cup title. But if you are, I would say that at least the Lightning and the Panthers are even in terms of the rivalry now, because and I say that because yes, winning your first Stanley Cup, it's a huge deal. I think the thing that kind of amplifies it, regardless of how you maybe view the potential of possibly having the biggest meltdown in NHL history and saving yourselves in Game 7, really in North American sports history too. I think beating the best of the era, I think that adds a little bit more spice to this championship. And yes, I'm referring to Connor McDavid. I mean, you see how he played, and let's face it, anybody that watched this series, if Barkov and Forsling don't play as well defensively as they did, and Ekblad and all those key players don't play as well defensively throughout this series, as well as McDavid played, it could have been worse. I mean, a lot of people don't realize, yes, the Oilers came back and tied the series to force Game 7, but that was all, and that was all during when McDavid, Game 6 and 7, did not score any points. Granted, he scored 8 points in 2 games, in 5 and 6. 4 and 5. So there's that as well. But yeah, I would have to say that maybe in order for the Panthers to get kind of on, not only for the short term, but I think for the long term, kind of get the upper hand in terms of who's the king of Florida. And maybe I'm being biased. If I am, that's fine, but this is just, and I'm sure everybody else views it a different way. I think they would have to maybe go back to the Stanley Cup Final, maybe have another long run, a couple of years of doing that. And that's going to be tough for them. And this is an off season for both clubs that is really gonna dictate how this rivalry goes over the next couple of years. The Lightning have their very well documented and talked about issues this offseason that we have talked about and will continue to talk about in the coming weeks and months, where the Panthers have a ton of players that are coming off their final year in a contract, in their contracts, and you don't know what's going to happen. We saw it with the Lightning firsthand, and I'm sure the Panthers are very well aware of that. I'm sure GM Bill Zito is already, as much as he's enjoying the celebrations and everything that comes with that of winning a Stanley Cup, I'm sure in the back of his mind he's already, the wheels are already turning about how is he going to be able to continue this success. Because as great as winning championships are, we all know the problem that comes with that, especially if you have a lot of expiring contracts, is that those players that you have, their value goes up. That's all that happens. I mean, we saw that. It's unfortunate, and that's why, especially in this day and age in the NHL, You don't see teams go on runs like what we saw with the Islanders and Canadians and Edmonton back in the day. You don't see those kind of runs anymore where teams go 3 years in a row to the final and win, or even 4. The Lightning did it 3 years in a row, but it was just one of those situations where, after I think they repeated, they definitely were a different team. And I think at that point, I don't want to take away having a deep run, but I think that the rest of the East didn't really catch up at that point. I think that was part of the conversation. I think that was part of it, if we're being brutally honest with ourselves. But yeah, I'm not saying this in any way that is taking shots at Florida. I'm not. I like I said, I'm happy for them. I think that they are a phenomenal hockey team, but I don't think that they're there to where people can say that the tables have turned in Florida and that they are the top dog or cat, if you want to call it that now. But I think that, they have another phenomenal year this year, and the Lightning don't play well or don't get far in the playoffs. That's going to be a problem. I mean, well, it's going to be a problem, but it's also, it will change things. It'll start to change things to where we're definitely going to have to view the Panthers a little higher. But of course, with the other roster move stuff and off-season things that the Lightning and the Panthers will have to contend with, let's not forget, you still have Boston who, they just made a big trade. They just traded Linus Ullmark to Ottawa. There's I mean, I don't know how to feel about Boston right now because I don't think they're done making moves. I'm sure we'll see some more moves be made this summer. And then on the other side of that, you have Detroit. You have Buffalo. I don't know about yet. Ottawa, I think, is starting to make some steps. Detroit definitely, I think, is they're a hop, skip, and a jump right into a playoff spot. And then you have Toronto, who we have no idea what they're going to do. I mean, they still, are they going to trade Marner? Are they going to go out and get more goaltending to support Wool? A lot of question marks there. So I think it also really depends on what happens in the Atlantic Division, because the Atlantic Division over the next couple of years is going to get really, really busy in terms of competition. Really, you look at the Atlantic Division, and especially over the next couple of years, if everything goes the way it's supposed to, everybody in this division except for Montreal is going to be competitive. So obviously only 3 teams and maybe 2 wild cards will make it. I mean, that'll be insane if, we're sitting here at the end of next year and 2 wild cards come out of the Atlantic Division. That'd be insane. I don't remember the last time that's happened, but I wouldn't put it past it, especially with how competitive the Atlantic Division could very well set to be in the next couple of years. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, let's all approach this in a unbiased adult manner. Okay. Are the Panthers there? Do they need more work? Do they need to win a little bit more? I think it's an honest question. I think it's a realistic conversation to have too, as well. So yeah, I'm, it's one of those things where I think I'm pretty sure you have Armando Velez on here of Locked On Panthers. He'll think otherwise. You ask fans around the league, they'll think otherwise. But in my book, I think that the Lightning are still have that edge in the state of Florida. So wrapping things up, we're talking about real quick about possibilities this summer, and this is strictly for the Lightning. What could we expect to happen this summer from them, and especially in the coming days? We have the NHL awards, which really have no bearing except for who wins what. Hopefully Kucherov goes home with the Hart. We have the NHL draft this Friday and Saturday. Don't expect the Lightning to really do much there. I mean, then again, there is this rumor that I saw today, which I saw on Twitter. It's not confirmed. Someone tweeted out a graphic. It looked like they were a fan, and it was tweeting it was quoting a Tampa Bay Lightning beat writer. I went to his page. I didn't see anything that confirmed this. So until we get a confirmation, I'm not going to read too much into it. But basically, the graphic said that the Lightning are actively shopping Tanner Jeannot, Nick Pervix, and Eric Chernak, which would be interesting. I mean, definitely, if you could get rid of Chernak, that's fine. That's great. Wonderful. Pervix, I think that, that's going to be a hard sell if you're really not going to get anything back for him. Tanner Jeannot, I think with the right team, it's going to have to be a playoff team, unfortunately, who are probably going to go after him. That would be nice to see if the Lightning could get something in return. Not as much as what they had to give up for him, but definitely get something back in return, at least for him. But yeah, the clock is definitely ticking, especially on Chernak as he becomes full no trade clause starting July 1st. And we are sitting here on the 25th, so really not much time left. If I had to guess what would happen with Chernak, unfortunately, my gut feeling tells me that he'll get moved at the draft, which I know I just got done saying that I don't expect much from the Lightning, and which really, in conclusion, tells me that Chernak is not going to get moved. I could be optimistic and sit here and tell you, yeah, but it's not going to happen. I did hear something today on the Jeff Marek show. Elliot Friedman, I believe, Jeff Marek actually brought it up, which was in passing. He thinks that the Lightning are going to buy out Connor Sheary, which I don't know how to feel about dead money. I'm not really, I'm not crazy about that. I mean, I would rather figure out a situation in which you could just package all the guys I've already talked about and just get a bunch of late draft picks. Better than nothing, really, in my opinion. I would like to see, out of all of this, and I don't know, it's just because Julian Brees-Boss, he's the kind of GM who, yes, he makes a bunch of mistakes here and there, but he also makes the good moves. And we saw that he's not afraid to reunite with players that once played on this team. Ryan McDonough. I wouldn't be surprised if the Lightning trade for a former Lightning player this summer. As for who, the only player that comes to mind, and I don't have his money right in front of me, but if I had to guess, the most likely reunion that we would see this summer of a Lightning player coming back to Tampa Bay would probably be would probably be maybe Ross Colton, or even maybe, I don't know how Seattle's feeling about Yanni Gourde. I mean, it's the thing is that we still don't know really at this point what the trade landscape is going to be this summer. I think every team is well aware of what they really need. But I think that really once we see what teams are starting to do and what their price tags are for certain players, I mean, I can't really say for certain who could get moved. Blake Coleman sounds nice on paper, but not to knock on him, but really, I don't believe Blake Coleman could have done what he did in Tampa if it wasn't for Yanni Gourde and some of the players around those guys too. And Barclay Goodrow is another one. That's another name that comes to mind too, because he just got put on waivers just last week, picked up by San Jose, will most definitely get picked up at the deadline. I would imagine that the Sharks are probably going to want a little bit more above asking price for Goodrow, given his playoff experience and how well he played in New York the last couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised if he is the number one target at the deadline. Yeah, I think it would be foolish for San Jose to turn around and flip him this summer, especially after just getting him. Then again, you never know. There's a lot of talk there that he obviously never wanted to leave New York in the first place. Rangers wanted to cut salary, put him on waivers just to get him off the books. San Jose, of course, picks him up, and turned out on the teams that he didn't want to be traded to when he gave New York his list, San Jose was one of them. So who knows? I mean, I could sit here and say that he won't get traded till the deadline, but he could also possibly get dealt on Friday at the draft. So it's like I said, I can't sit here and say for sure what exactly. I don't even think the GMs know. I think it's kind of going to be a sit back and waiting game. And see what everybody else does, and once they name their prices, really that's what's going to happen. But yeah, those are the players that I think that really we got to keep our eyes on. Sherry, Perbix, like I said, I don't think Chernak's going anywhere. There's a lot of talk weirdly about Cirelli getting moved. I haven't heard any confirmed reports that the Lightning are even remotely interested in moving him, which if Anthony Cirelli gets traded to clear up cap space, that would be probably the last straw for me and I wouldn't be able to defend Julien Brisebois anymore. It's one thing when the Lightning traded Goodrow. Okay, we get it. But you're trading away a potential future Selke Trophy winner, and which in today's NHL could very well mean the difference between winning a cup and not. I mean, you look at Florida with Barkov, and Cirelli is by far their best center. That would be ludicrous. So for those of you that are nervous about that happening, if that were to happen, then I could truthfully tell you that Julien Brisebois doesn't want to be the Lightning GM anymore. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, what are your what do you, when you think of the summer for the Lightning, what are some possibilities you see? And like I said, we will take breaks here and there throughout the summer to talk about breaking news, talk about certain certain storylines, all that stuff, as we're rewatching the 2004 Stanley Cup run. So like I said, that'll be starting Thursday, and I would imagine that will probably run through the entirety of the summer into September. So keep an eye out for that. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.